Martin has had a difficult life. His mother wouldn't let him grow, kids constantly made fun of him, and his relationships with women had always ended tragically. A bad accident when he was very young left him disfigured, with scars on his face, half of an ear missing, and some lost teeth due to poor health and little care. This only added to his struggles. Martin was born with defects: 6 toes on 1 foot, a speech impediment, and the whitest skin imaginable. Since he was 20, he had been hoping to grow hair, but the only hair that would grow was on his head. His social disorder made it hard for him to get a job. After his mom passed away, he rarely left the house, mostly only going out at night. Martin was restless at 6 in the morning as he thought about the past. He was a lonely man, and his best friend in the world was a cat. Although his cat was not very active anymore, Jasmine was a beautiful cat that had been his friend forever.
He stroked her as he reminisced about the last week, a week that had changed his life. Everywhere he went, he was either unnoticed, ignored, or abhorred. He had been walking to the store, just like he walked everywhere. Getting a license would mean being around people, and he could not bear to do this often. That day, when he happened to pass the park, Annie and Kat were standing there.
He could not bring himself to call them by their names out loud. He believed that saying a name gives it power over you. Over the years, he had learned that when someone you cherish has power over you, they can drain your soul. If only they could be his friends, perhaps they would be better friends than the others who had left. He tried not to dwell on all those who had abandoned him. When he thought of Kat and Annie, he saw them as pets, pretty things he would one day play with.
Kat was the obvious weaker one. She was his first choice. Annie terrified him and impressed him, and he felt in awe of her. It took a full week for him to gather the courage to talk to them. He had been following them since that day, barely sleeping and barely eating. His favorite meal of all time was Oreos and milk. Each cabinet in his house was filled with Oreo cookies and not much else.
Every once in a while he would season a raw steak, cook it until it was warm, and then slowly savor the memories of all the people in his life who had passed away. In his refrigerator, there was milk, but not a single gallon lasted past its expiration date. The only other food in his house was a freezer full of meat that he had hunted and butchered himself. Today, and every day since he had been following the 2 women, he drank milk and ate spare handfuls of Oreos.
The first day he had followed them, he had become immersed in their life and mannerisms. He had learned to read lips a long time ago. Every word they spoke, he held in his mind as if he cherished them.
Often, when he could follow them no longer, he would go home and take notes furiously about each and everything he had witnessed. His pale skin had become a problem at night. He would often burn paper and wood in the fireplace and rub the char into his skin. Last night he found the girls throwing eggs at the neighborhood houses. It was getting easier to track their path every day. He watched them all the time, trying to gather the courage to speak to them. He couldn't believe that tonight he had spoken to them. It was the same thing every time he met new girls. They all reacted in the same scared way, and he had come to welcome their scared reactions, as if they were welcoming him. Tonight they had been the easiest to track. He could almost smell them as they walked down the street past his house. They had a routine of doing small juvenile things for enjoyment. Martin had no opinion of right or wrong. He was just excited that they always seemed to fearlessly enter the night regardless of who would meet them. They had seen him trailing them quickly. When he finally felt the time was right to speak to them, though, he said all the wrong things. They had run from him. He couldn't blame them. Trailing them back to Kat's house had not been a complicated thing. No matter how far the distance they went, he could follow them now. Somehow he had known they would end up at Kat's home. People were always creatures of habit. The best thing was his pretties felt safe when reaching Kat's house. Walking inside, it had not been very long until they went to Kat's bedroom. It was located on the 2nd floor, but fortunately for him, there was a tree nearby.
He had spent countless hours in this tree, watching Kat sleep. She was simple but sweet, and she always slept with a light on. Kat wore nice nightgowns, tiny shorts, or occasionally nothing at all. Last night, from the tree, he had seen something that had shocked him a little.
Kat and Annie had embraced upon entering the bedroom. They kissed and made out like lovers do. It did not surprise him that they were lovers of any kind. What surprised him was how gentle and sweet it seemed, like it had happened many times before. The scene made him long for all the kisses he had never received.
His pretties were feverish for each other. They had no idea he was outside looking in the window. After some time, when they had fallen asleep, he made his way home.
As he thought of them, he could not help feeling excited. When they were walking, the smell of them, how they had been intimate and everything about them, made him feel exhilarated. He had long ago become impotent. His equipment hadn't worked since before his mother had died. Absolutely nothing he did could bring his flaccid member to attention. As he pondered when he might see the girls again, he thought about the scene he had witnessed this morning. How dare that slimy idiot talk to his pretties? Jason would be someone he would need to visit soon. He would teach him to leave them alone.
As he pondered all his thoughts, he stroked his cat, daydreaming about what life would have been like had he been a more normal person. He had been born abnormal, but nothing that could not be corrected. His father, James Masters, had been an alcoholic. He used to love his dad, but through the drinking and the beatings he received for being abnormal, a hate had grown. The day of the accident, his dad had told him he wished he had never been born. Mal Karma can be a mean bitch, and that day she had paid Martin a favor but had taken a price. James had died immediately when the semi had struck them on Route 43. Martin had been seriously injured. For months his mother had to care for his every need and feed him with a spoon. His early teens had been spent in a severely damaged state.
His first year when he reached puberty was spent getting sponge baths from his mother. It did not seem gross to him that his mother gave him his first boner. She seemed to be lonely, and the baths felt so good. When his health improved, he could take care of himself, yet the sponge baths from mother continued. In those earlier years things were nice. He was not sure when it changed, but his mother grew to be a mean, hateful shrew.
She had always had a temper, but she had started smacking him when she was in a bad mood. The first time she hit him, it had been a shock. She had been bathing him as always, and he playfully pulled her into the tub. She had been bathing his groin, and he was excited. When she realized what was on his mind, she had picked up the first thing she could, the iron, and smacked him in the head with it.
For a week there were no sponge baths and she barely spoke to him. Slowly she felt more comfortable and the baths continued. One night she had bathed him and he had strolled naked into his room to get dressed. His mother had been putting his laundry in a drawer. She was wearing a short sundress and was bent over. Whatever made him do it, he had no idea, but he had roughly thrown her on his bed. He ripped her sundress to shreds and raped her repeatedly that night.
It must have been rape. She had given no consent and had cried for 2 days after it. During the act, she submitted to him. Once again, there were no sponge baths for a few days. When they resumed, his mother was subdued and determined. She was his world. He had not attended school for years, had no friends, and had little contact with other people. They lived like this for over 8 years. His mother would go from being nice to being hateful.
To Martin, he had grown so dependent on her that it was an obsession. One day, everything changed when his mother handed him some money and announced that everything had changed. "Martin, I am leaving." This was all she said as she began packing her bags. She offered no explanation, and her voice betrayed little emotion. "Your Social Security and James's insurance will make sure you live well." She whispered and paused. "The house and everything in it is now yours." Martin did not speak. He did not say a word. Something inside of him snapped. She was walking toward the door as he grabbed the back of her hair. He hit her over the head hard. As she bled to death, he forcibly covered her screaming lips and made love to her one last time. It's hard to know exactly when she died. The only thing for sure was she died long before he was done using her body. What followed could only be described as a bizarre ritual of bathing her from head to toe. When he was finished, he laid her naked body on the dining room table and began sawing it into pieces. As he savored these memories like looking at old photographs, he felt hungry. Today was a special day, and he decided he would have a steak tonight.
As he walked to the freezer, he slowly opened the door. The burst of cold air from the freezer felt amazing. On the shelves of the freezer were simple brown-wrapped cuts of meat. Each one was labeled and dated, describing the type of meat inside.
As he walked to the freezer, he slowly opened the door. The burst of cold air from the freezer felt amazing. On the shelves of the freezer were simple, brown-wrapped cuts of meat. Each one was labeled and dated, describing the type of meat inside. As he looked over them, he chose a large cut to satisfy his insatiable hunger today. He closed the freezer door and thawed the cut of meat. Then, he hand-rubbed salt, pepper, and a mix of spices into the meat. He fried this wonderful steak in a pan with only butter and onions for 2 minutes on each side. Martin was the kind of person who planned everything to the last detail. His plate and knife were already waiting for him as he sipped his milk and ate his steak. He stared at the brown package that had held the meat, noticing the writing on it from the old yellow trash can across the room. With each bite, he savored the memories.
The brown package read 8/15/07. Today was her anniversary. She had been dead for 2 years.